Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that lovely piece there, Jean-Jerome. We are welcoming our special guest and my friend, Brian Walsh. Good evening, Brian Walsh.
Good evening. How are you doing this evening?
I'm good. I'm pretty good. And Jean-Jerome, good evening.
Boy, everyone tuning in, welcome, a warm welcome to Brian. We've been wanting to have you on the show for quite some time. We're very happy, very honored to have you on.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So I want to welcome everybody to episode 32 of Ancestral Eyes, and we have a very special guest. He is a friend of mine. I've known him for a number of years, and we were able to connect through Facebook. And our friend Brian Walsh had been very evasive when we first started our show. It was hard to pin him down. He has a very busy schedule, so it's not really his fault. But I have wanted him on this show since the beginning. And so here you are, finally. Okay,
finally,
great.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for your patience.
No problem. I was not going to let go, right? I'm Rottweiler girl, and once I bite into someone, I won't let go.
I'm sure that served you well in life.
Oh, it has.
Yeah.
So anyway, like I said, Brian Walsh is a friend of mine, and he is a Irish scholar and his ancestral roots. He is also, well, I'm not going to say a bard because that is incorrect. Okay. So what I'm going to do is ask Jean-Jerome to read your bio and have everyone have a listen to and get to know a little bit about you. Okay. Go ahead, Jean-Jerome.
Okay. Well, it's my honor and pleasure. So Brian is a professional storyteller. I think he defines himself primarily as that's his passion and vocation, to tell stories. And he's also a registered psychotherapist. He works as a spiritual care provider at a major mental health hospital and volunteers as a pagan chaplain at the University of Toronto. As a CRPO registered psychotherapist, Brian works with individuals and groups providing spiritually informed psychotherapy in both private practice and in a hospital setting. As a professional storyteller, Brian has told Celtic stories at numerous venues, including the Toronto Storytelling Festival, while guest lecturing at the University of Toronto on stage at Dundas Square and deep in the woods around a campfire with friends. Brian has a background in world religions, Celtic studies, and spiritual care with a BA from the University of Toronto and a Master of Philosophy from the University of Wales and other graduate level training from the University of Toronto. Brian is especially interested in the intersection of spirituality, mental health, and narrative. No matter which of his many hats Brian is wearing, story is at the heart of his practice.
It's all about the story.
It's all about the story. There we go.
It's all about the story. Okay. So we're going to dive deep into our conversations. We'll do our first preliminary, which we always ask all of our guests, is when did you start your spiritual path and what motivated you? So take it away, Brian. Give us a little bit of a background.
Okay. Well, I was born at a very young age, and from there I grew up. My family has a blended heritage. Mom's side is Acadian French, and dad's side is Scottish and Irish. So there's all three of those things going on. And I grew up with Catholicism on both sides. As a kid, it was a fairly positive version of it, like, because some people have different experiences in the church. I had a pretty good one. And I grew up as a military brat, so I was moving from base to base. Basically, every 4 years, I was somewhere new. And
that's hard.
well, it's really hard as a civilian, but if you live on base, it's not quite as bad because there's a culture of it, and the kids are all part of the same culture. Where when you move as a civilian, sometimes you're the new kid until you die of old age, right? Like it's harder. Yeah. So I can there's a big difference there. And so even though the church was sort of it was okay for me as a child, and I was an altar boy, and I enjoyed doing the rituals and the rites. As I started growing and thinking, and there were parts of the theology that just didn't feel like they were mine. Right? There were things in relation to women, things in relation to at the time I didn't notice it, but things that would eventually be related to my own queerness. Like, all of these pieces would make a difference over time. But as somebody moving around a lot, it also left me seeking roots. Right. So both my parents are from New Brunswick, and of course the logical step might have been to, find roots there and in my own family. But I'd sort of met, I'd met my own relatives very briefly and very tangentially, in a way that didn't, through nobody's fault. Like, everybody was lovely, but we didn't fully connect. Yeah, and I think we connected better, some of us, as adults later on, and it's an ongoing goal, right? But I felt like I wasn't from anywhere, right? And so this was very sort of textbook. I wasn't from anywhere, and I was in places where usually there was a lot of nature, because a lot of military bases are in wilder places, right? There's from grades 6 to 10, I was way up in northern Alberta, and I could literally get on my bike and ride for hours. I could ride as far as I could ride before I needed to turn back and ride home, and still technically be on base. Like, wow. It was just unbelievable. But that gave me a strong sense of nature as well, right? Like, so growing up in a place where I think some of my time in northern Alberta was really formative. The days were long in the summer and short in the winter, and there was the northern lights, and there'd be bears in the backyard half the time, and well, not half the time, but often enough for it not to be weird. When the conversation runs like this, you're trying to leave the back door to go to school, and school would be going through the woods, down into a ravine, across a creek, up the ravine, and to the other side, right? So I can literally say I went to school and back, uphill, both ways, in 40 below weather, 90 after wind chill, right? Like, wow. This is nature that can eat you.
It forms you.
Yeah. And so, going back to the bears, you'd look out, sometimes you'd shake the screen door and they'd leave, and other times the conversation went like this, Ma, there's a bear in the backyard. Leave through the front. Like not even a surprise, not like, leave through the front. Because normally we weren't allowed to use the front door, so.
I bet that made a difference for the bear. He's coming around through the front. Let's leave him alone.
Exactly. Yeah, as long as you're not between them and the garbage cans, they're okay.
Yeah.
So it was this quest for roots, combined with a fairly decent religious upbringing to start, because I think that if you're brought up in something, it gives you a better foundation. It gives you some things to unlearn, but it also gives you a better foundation to proceed as well.
I agree.
because to go from like a zero, like an atheist point of view to a world full of gods can be a real leap.
Yeah.
Right. Where to go from Catholicism, I mean, the Baptists think that the Catholics are pagan to begin with. So, with all the saints and such, it was not too big a leap.
Absolutely. All you have to do is sort of cut around it and you go, here we go.
So I think it was those things. It was the big nature, a good sense of wanting a religion, wanting spirituality in my life, and then that quest for roots. And that quest for roots brought me to my Irish heritage, because I didn't see any French stories, which, I mean, there's some great folklore I found out years later, but I'd already had my formation, right?
Right.
So sometimes it's just a matter of what's in your path, what is given.
And it's up to the spirits too. They lead you down a different path, the gods, the spirits, whatever you want to call them. You take that route, and there is a reason for it.
Absolutely, yeah. So I left the church right after my my first my confirmation, which is probably a day late and a dollar short, but it was that very process that actually was supposed to pull me in, and it confirmed that this was not my path. So what happened outside and what happened inside.
I did the same thing.
You did?
Yeah. It was after confirmation I sort of went, well, that was interesting.
Yeah. I don't know, it might be a function of the age too, right? 13, 14 or whatever it is. That
time to look for something else, something that spoke to you, right? Yeah, no, I hear you.
Exactly. And so from there I found I'd already been reading a lot of books on mythology, even as a younger child. Delaire's book of Greek myths and Delaire's book of Norse myths. Loved those. So I'm a fan of everybody's mythic stories and the way they express truth. And so looking for the Irish stories, it was a kind of quest for home, which is not a slam on the home I have in any way, but I was looking for the thing that was under the thing, right?
Right.
If this is home, what's under home?
Right.
And years later, I mean, that's what I end up telling my students who are I'm training in spiritual care. You're looking for the thing under the thing, or I'll share the Haitian proverb: behind the mountains there are mountains. Like there's a Mexican one as well that says under the river there is a river. Like that's what we're looking for.
Yes. Good analogies. I love that.
And that's what I've been looking for all my life, and luckily, fairly successful at finding it.
Right.
Yeah, I've considered myself pagan since I was 14. Went through a very long and significant period where I would have called myself Celtic Wiccan. It was what I could see. It was what was available. But I also met some really good people who were part of my formation as well. Everything has been a step on the journey.
Yep, I totally agree.
So that's the gist of how I found my path. Yeah.
No, and it's funny because I guess maybe growing up in Toronto, we all sort of had that. I think the Toronto pagan community, we all came from somewhere, and we all sort of converged together and shared stories. We kind of took the same path, like you said, the Wiccan path. That's what presented itself until other things, and other people. Met some wonderful people. No, I totally agree with you. So, with regards to your spiritual path, what made you decide to go towards your chaplaincy, and how did that lead to your professional life? So, take us through the steps there. So, you decided you were going to be a pagan, and how did that progress to you?
Okay. Yeah. I think that even starting with the early stories, the Irish stories have a strong social sense to them. I mean, we have a lot of romantic notions about, wizards who live off in the forest or whatever. But the stories themselves also have a strong social justice component, and also a strong social participation component, and a strong voice against injustice. Like one of our central myths, it's one of the side themes is pretty much against bad taxes. Taxes are fine, but it needs to be for the people. And they're pretty much saying it out loud in the middle of this grand story that's about, the gods and the demons. It would be like in the middle of the Greek Titanomachy, or the battle between the Devas and the Asuras in India, and somebody's like saying, "Oh, and by the way, you didn't use that money to pave a road." Like, where did this come from? So there's always been that social sense, right? If you're doing something, do it in the world.
Right.
And I was a pagan in the world.
Pragmatic.
And so my schoolwork was like, my first degree was in world religions and Celtic studies with a minor in anthropology, and that was toward I was building a kind of the kind of background that I would see like a rabbi getting in his tradition, or a priest would be getting in his tradition. It was willful. I mean, publicly, like on the surface level, I thought that I was going to be a professor. Academia is complicated, but it was all really in service of my vocation, which was the priestly vocation. No matter whether I was doing that in the university or in some other way, right? And so it was between that and like founding the small tradition that I still work in. Me and my ex-wife founded a tradition back in 1990, and it's been going ever since. The circles have met for at least the holidays since all of that time, and most of the people have been with us for a really long time. Like we're pretty private, but we're pretty consistent, right?
Nice.
And so that fed into it too. But because that felt like very private work, I needed to have a public face, right? Not for its own sake, but you need to be doing something in the world.
Right.
That is, if you're like, you could be a violin virtuoso if you only play in your basement, and only your cousins hear you. So what, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, you're right.
Claiming to be a virtuoso, but better to be a half-assed busker and getting out there than not getting out there, right?
No, for sure. You have to have that outlet. It's like, okay, so I've accumulated this, I've done this, but how do I connect with community? How do I better myself for community?
Exactly. And yeah, how do you give back? Because community helped shape me. There's some really important teachers in the world that I've had, and to not do for someone else, or not at least try to do for someone else what they succeeded in doing for me, would be a disservice, right? And so back in 2002, 2002, the position of pagan chaplain at U of T opened up. So there already was one.
Nice.
Before me, there was Dana Shaw, and she needed somebody to work alongside me. And before Dana, there was Elizabeth Mose, and I think she was the one who founded it. I hope I'm doing justice to that lineage. And then when Dana left, Catherine Starr came on. So we had a Wiccan chaplain, and we had a Celtic, and then we had a Celtic and Reconstructionist chaplain. And so the two of us were sort of the two sides of popular paganism in certain ways.
Nice.
And we ended up doing everything. Like, within the school context, we
Right.
teamed up an awful lot. It wasn't like two separate sets of tasks. It was
Right.
many hands make light work.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when you decided to do this, and you were at the university level, when we had spoken privately, there were quite a few students that were obviously pagan and pagan friendly. And, obviously you and Catherine Starr had plenty of people, congregation, a mass, whatever you want to call it. And then what happened? I know you still do that. You volunteer at U of T for to continue being a chaplain, a pagan chaplain.
Right.
But so tell us what happened at that point with regards to, the student body and how it changed now. So
yeah. So one of the things that I do as a chaplain at U of T, there's some things that I do that are multi-faith, and then there's some things that I do that are pagan specific. And there's
right.
a student group called UTPS, so the University of Toronto Pagan Society. I think they've added earth-based in there somewhere recently, but the acronym didn't change. And back in the early to mid 2000s, like from 2000, like from when I arrived to till maybe the next 8 years, we were meeting every 2 weeks, and there was always between 12 and 20 people there, and it was really, really thriving, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
And then somewhere and I'm going to get the dates wrong, but somewhere in that period, everybody graduated together, even though some were undergraduates and some were masters, and one or two were doing PhDs, and there was somebody else who was an alumni, but they got a job out of town. Like there was this sudden, it disappeared.
Disbursement of people.
Yeah, and not because like everything was fine. It was just a natural process of life, but it all went at the same time. And the students that have come after that have had to work really hard, because it's like gravity, right? If you the bigger the group, the easier it is to get more groups. Just like those, if there's pebbles floating in space, it's easier to get more of them. And so UTPS is still around today, and they're still putting on events on a regular basis. I was doing one last night, actually. I was doing a storytelling event for them.
Yes, you sent us a link for that. Sorry, I couldn't.
Yeah, no worries. But we had 6 people there, so it was, it wasn't like, Catherine and I and one
like
person.
The old days.
But it wasn't 20 people, but 6 is still good, right? I just have I have aspirations for them that it grow again and that it become amazing, and I'm sure that's what they want for themselves as well, right?
Right.
But it needs to be member driven, member run. I can show up and do a thing, or we can have a guest speaker come in and do a thing, or Catherine will do a thing, or whatever it may be, or the students can choose to do a thing, right? Like they run it. This is about helping them become leaders and become good participants and all of that. And so we're as hands-off as possible and as hands-on as needed, but that's by request, right? Like somebody needs to say, Brian, do you want to do a thing?
Yeah.
Because that way they can grow into their leadership and just, figure it out the way. Remember back in the 80s when we were allowed to figure it out?
Yeah, we did, and we survived. And so how is it now? What's the generation now? Is there still that interest, people wanting to spiritually invest in discovering themselves like what we did back, in the day?
I can't say, actually. Like it varies.
No. It's hard to put your finger on it.
It's hard to put my finger on it, in part because, I know when I was 20, I didn't tell the 50-year-old everything, right?
True.
So there's that part, but also in a world that's post-internet, I think needs get met in a variety of different ways.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And
No, you're right. You're right.
and
When we didn't
yeah,
have that, when
no,
we were coming up, no, we had to do our own work, going to libraries, going to other people's homes, etc. No, that's true.
and
It's really sort of taken a toll that way. So that's
absolutely.
interesting.
Yeah, but
Now,
I think just before we leave that point,
yeah,
like information wise, it's really given the generation coming up a great advantage because there's so much information there. Now they need really good BS detectors because there's a lot of bad information with the good. Uh,
true,
but it,
true.
it, it can become more of an independent study, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
that's on one hand, that's great because not
Mm-hmm.
everybody has other people to work with. But the downside of that is it makes it harder to build community, right? Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it's just different, right? The challenges are different, and
Yeah, yeah.
I wouldn't want any of that to sound judgy or
No,
it's
no,
different. And so the best
no.
we can do
It's,
is make sure that we're available insofar as
yeah.
we can be. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a different generation. And like you said, now we're the elders and we leave this legacy behind, and it's up to others to pick it up, if so be it, right? Which makes it easier. I think we've made it easier for the next generation, because for us, it wasn't, we were sort of like the groundbreakers, you know, because there wasn't
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
to go on, so.
Or the ones that were just before us, like the ones who we were looking to in the 80s, the ones who did it in the late 60s, early 70s, like that generation.
Yes,
that
thank you.
that
You're
that
right.
generation.
They did. They left us the crumbs. We picked it up and we made gingerbread man, right? And stuff. And we left bigger cookies and stuff, right? So let's just hope that it continues. I think there always will be,
Oh
so
yeah,
now it,
yeah.
so sorry, my cat's starting to jump on or trying to jump on me here. It's live and I have animals. So anyway,
Wonderful.
yeah. So anyway, so my another question that leads me into is your own personal practice. You've touched upon that, and with regards to the Celtic association with your Irish roots and that type of thing. Um, Tell us about some of the things that you did to go towards your professional level, where you now deal with people who have mental health issues, and how did that come to be? So going from your spiritual pagan path, your personal practice that you have established, how did that extend or move sideways to your professional working with people who have disabilities?
Yeah. Um, so how did it start? So when I arrived in Toronto back in the late 80s, I was
Uh-huh.
going to school part time and working full time. And so
Mhm.
my undergrad, my 4 year undergrad took me 7 years, and my even shorter master's took me 7 more years. And I use that as just a, a I'm kind of a living example of you don't have to do it fast, right? And when somebody
Professional
looks at
student?
oh yeah, if someone says, oh, it'll take me a decade to do that, well, in a decade you're going to be a decade older. Do you want to be a decade older with it or without it?
Or without it? Exactly.
Because you're getting old either way. And so,
Yeah, exactly.
unless you've got a better plan, use this plan.
Yeah,
Uh, so I thought I was headed toward academia, to be honest.
right.
But by the end of my
Mhm.
master's, that didn't feel like something I really wanted to do. And through all of that time, I'd been working at a bank. I'd been doing a variety of credit card related things, risk management and credit management, and
I remember
uh,
we had discussed
yeah,
that once about
I,
being
I was the guy
bankers.
who phoned people up and said, "Did you just buy $1 worth of gas and then a stereo?" No, no, that wasn't you. All right, then we've got some forms to fill out. I was that guy, uh, among other roles, but for a while I was that guy. And that kept me going through school. But
hey, whatever paid the bills, right?
Absolutely. But the bank evaporated from underneath me. They moved to another city, and I wasn't going to, because my life was here.
Right.
And it was one of the best things that could have happened to me. Like, this is one of those moments where the gods put something in your path, because I'm not a big risk taker. And so I would have kept that seat until I retired, and I would have complained throughout. And, you know, I mean, sometimes
like me,
I'm a
career banker.
Sometimes I'm a role model. Sometimes I'm just an object lesson. You know, it can really go either way. But in that instance, I was just not moving, and so the bank moved, and I wasn't going to change cities, and so I looked at retraining, and at that point, I was looking at various possibilities, and I was looking at what my chaplaincy was looking like at U of T, and I stumbled across what was once called hospital chaplaincy. Now it's called spiritual care. And the big difference is that chaplaincy is where you're kind of speaking on behalf of tradition, in the same way that a priest or a priestess or a rabbi or whoever, they speak on behalf of tradition. Spiritual care doesn't do that. I mean, if somebody asks flat out, is this a thing in that trad? You might say so. But instead of sort of this action, it's this action. You're getting their feelings up out of them. You're finding out what they really believe. And most people don't believe most people don't even know what they believe, right? You've got your surface beliefs, but then the beliefs that you act on, right? Like, imagine.
It takes a tragedy. It takes a tragedy or something to really challenge those beliefs until you dig a little bit deeper. And, you know, I know with you, with regards to how that led to, you know, dying and death, I'd like to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
And I said it right, didn't I, Brian?
You did.
Instead of death and dying, right?
Because it's dying and death. Dying comes first.
That's right.
So it was back in 2006 anyway. I did the hospital portion of my training. And because my degree was an academic degree and not a degree with pastoral stuff that like some of my Christian colleagues would have had, I was doing the hospital work by day, and at night I was doing courses in the like the pastoral program. So that's things like religion and psychology through the life cycle, psychotherapy and spirituality, not spiritual direction. I did a great course on conversion, but it wasn't about converting people from one tradition to another. It was about that ever deepening process. Like, okay, you've got this far. What's under that? Like, how do you really get down? And even though that one was taught in a Catholic context, humans are humans and beliefs are beliefs. How do you, like, it was very, I could do the translation matrix in my head for how does this work somewhere else, right? So, and so after the year of clinical training plus all of these courses that I was doing, and my coursework was just ahead of what I needed to stay in the program, because I'd come from another field. But I was also able to tell them, because they have what's called an equivalency program, right? So this is the Canadian Association of Spiritual Care, or they're the ones who do the training, right? An equivalency program, I had to show that this course in my tradition would be like New Testament studies in your tradition. Right?
Okay.
So even though my Celtic studies degree, I mean, the people teaching me weren't teaching me as pagans, but they were teaching me material that I'm using in this way. Right? So if I were a Greek pagan doing classical studies, you know, and I take a whole course on the Iliad or the theogony and the birth of the gods and all of that, I'd be like, they were teaching it to me in this way, but this is what I was receiving, so it's equivalent. because you can't just start from
Interesting.
nowhere, or you can't just start
Yeah.
with
Yeah,
no.
it's groundbreaking.
Yeah, although I'm not the first pagan in Canada to do spiritual care. I think I might be the third.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's someone out in Alberta. You'd think we'd know each other. We don't.
Yeah, no, because I've never heard anyone other than you, Brian. So yeah, okay, that's interesting.
When I got in, I'm like, I'm the first who's doing. And I said this on one of the Yahoo boards, and somebody else said, "Well, actually, Brian, is this one over here?" And pointed me
Wow.
to a woman in Alberta. I think she's since retired. She was just a little bit older than I am, but yeah. So that was a surprise.
Yeah, no kidding.
But yeah, I spent 6 years 6 or 7 years doing acute care, and now I've been doing about the same length of time doing mental health care, and
Okay.
I've been loving it. It's a
Yeah.
challenging job, but it's a really enjoyable job.
Do you
Yeah.
have any, like, I know when we were talking privately, tell us a little bit about some case studies, just to sort of give us an example of sort of the meshing together of your faith-based plus the dying and death. And if you could just sort
Right.
of give us a background.
Yeah. So when I'm doing my hospital work, when I'm doing spiritual care,
Hmm.
even though my spirituality informs who I am, it's not informing what comes out of my mouth, because the practice is again drawing things up out of the client, not
Right.
putting things down onto them, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but two, like one quick example from each field. Uh, the first one is the one that I talk about in the Dying and Death Symposium. So this has been one that I've told more than once. But my very first patient, when I was basically still an intern doing this work clinically, the pager goes off. My supervisor grabs the pager, sort of tosses it at me, and says, "Go see what that is." I had just had the hospital tour and just had all the basics, and I mean, I had some stuff behind me, but this was my very first actual, like,
Uh,
non-theoretical encounter, right? And
wow.
so
Do
I
or
get
die, right?
to her, yeah. So I get to the department that it was in, and the patient had already died, and that's why the pager had gone off to provide support for the family.
Right.
And so I arrive there, and when I step into the room, the first thing that I see is a family that that to my eye anyway looks East Asian, or looks, Chinese. And
Hmm.
so I find out that most of them were new to the country and didn't speak a lot of English. Um, but there was one person who was a relative of the deceased who did. And he had a little bit of English, and they were trying to figure out what to do here. Right? What do you do in Canada?
Right.
What's going on here? But he also didn't want anything, rightfully, he didn't want anything put on him or put on his brother that was not
Right.
appropriate to them.
Right.
Um, and so he's looking at me, and I'm on the screen here. Yeah, he's looking at me, and he's trying to say, he says, um, "We're not Christian, we're not Buddhist, and then he looks away and he goes, he makes this stepping motion with his hands. He sort of touched his chest and went like that while he was hunting for words. This is not a symbol for anything. He was just word hunting,
Right.
and I saw that, and I'm like, oh, you honor your ancestors. And the look of relief on his face that I could help him with the word finding, and he's like,
Wow.
okay. So now he knew that at least one person wasn't going to try and um, give him something he didn't
Impose
need.
something else on
Yeah,
him. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And so from there, we were able to talk about what his secular needs are, and what the secular process is here in Canada. And he was able to tell me a little bit about how he would figure out how he was going to work on doing the traditional side.
Hmm.
The family was Hmong. So the Hmong Chinese are a particular group with a particular set of traditions, and
Hmm.
amazing rich history. And that really, I mean, it was sad, but
sorry to interject right there, but Ofunshi, that is the community he serves in the United States. One of the communities he serves, the Hmong community in the United States.
Oh, very cool.
Where he's a babalao, but he's regarded within that community as a shaman because of the equivalency of the the practice and everything. As we had on our last show.
Very neat. I'll have to go back and listen to that one. I've been listening to a few of the shows, but I've been kind of hit and miss.
Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, so that moment, it felt kind of tailor-made because the other students, the other interns that were with me, all had a Christian background, and I had a world religions background. That moment happened much quicker and much more smoothly than it would have for one of my peers, which is not a comment on their capacity or just we know the things we know. And so
right person for the right time.
So the parts that feel sort of fateful or given are me being evicted from the job that I really didn't want, and the very first person I saw, I was able to apply knowledge in a good way in the service of the client, not in service of anything but their need and
their beliefs.
And so when I do the Dying in Death Symposium, I tell that story in order to illustrate diversity and the importance of diversity. And because we can't know everyone. I mean, I happened to know something about the Hmong, but if they were from the people group next door, I might have been completely lost. So it's not about having the right information. I mean, it helps. But if you don't have that, to have the right questions, to come with the right openness so that you're not making assumptions.
Right.
And those assumptions can be really dangerous. Like, there are so many people who, just because of exposure, how many people in just, folks in North America will think that every other religion is pretty much like Christianity, just dressed up in different clothes, right? It's all just Christianity in drag. And it's not. There are different end goals. There are different things going on. I mean, there is a level where people are people, and of course, there is a level where sure it's all the same, but there's also a level where no, it's not, and that level is deep. It's not just a superficial icing. Oh, you put up a tree, you light some candles. It's still different stories.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Different terra firma.
Absolutely. So that would be an example from the acute care side where death was a common occurrence. And I was doing, in addition to working my own floors, I was doing a lot of on-call shifts at night. And so at night when your pager goes off, it's always something horrible, right? Where during the day on your floor, it could be just somebody wanting support. Or on rare occasions, somebody wanting to express gratitude because their operation went well. We don't get those calls as often as I might like. We get called for the swampland of things. And that's.
Can I ask you, did you deal with anybody during this COVID season, during the first wave? Did you deal with any of the families or anybody that was dying?
No, I had peers who did a lot of work in that department, but because I was already moved to I was in a mental health facility, we weren't dealing with that directly. A lot around the worry that comes with it and things like that. But yeah, it wasn't no direct hands-on stuff for myself anyway.
So give us for example, so now you're in a health establishment, a mental health establishment. How do you lend support there through your given faith-based chaplaincy to someone?
Well, it wouldn't be my faith-based chaplaincy, right? That's what I do at U of T.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Right.
Okay.
It would be through the spiritual care. Yeah, two hats.
Right.
They
That's
overlap
right. Oh my
little,
God.
but yeah, definitely two hats. And then the storyteller hat is the big mega hat that covers them both.
It's the big sombrero.
Totally. Yeah. So in in both like what those two jobs share, I mean, acute care and mental health care, is that people often don't have people to listen to them, right? And there are things that you might want to talk about that at the same time you may or may not want to talk about with your family. Like how often is the patient also being brave for their family? Right, so the family isn't being fully honest because they're really supporting the patient, and the patient is suppressing some things because they want to put on a brave face for the family, and there's a level of that where maybe that's great, maybe that's part of the recovery work and the strength focused work, but then there's also some stuff that's not being said. So I'm the guy who's set apart, and you get to unload there. Right, and really sort of start digging in, and
that's hard.
And it's by listening in the right way, and asking the right, or well, giving them the right affirmation and the right reflection. You know, I'm not a cheerleader, but I will be exploring different beliefs. And over the course of a conversation, if somebody says one thing and then says something else, I'll have to reach back and grab the first thing and say, how do these two sit next to each other?
Right.
You know?
Right.
Like if you know, most of the clients have a Christian background or a post-Christian background, and if in one breath they say that God is love, and in another breath they say that they feel like they're being punished, okay. Now I'm not going to judge either of these beliefs, but let's put them right next to each other,
and let's look at this.
Yeah, how are they? Because clearly they're at this moment they're true together. How are they true together? Or is one an outmoded belief? Is one something from their childhood and the other one is from their lived experience? You know, because if grandma told you that God is love, but you've had a really rough life and duck and cover has been your way of getting through things, then God might feel a bit of a lightning slinger there. You know, so how do you pull all this together? And it's not my job to decide what that client believes, but if I can bring them deeper in what that is, and I have to come from a place of unknowing. If I know what this is, and you just go this way, like, no, that doesn't work.
No.
And you know, and even if I were right, like, which I probably wouldn't be, but even if I were right, when information is bestowed that way, it only falls this far. But if it's called up, it has to come all the way up through the whole system,
and that can be very hard and messy.
And it's their answer, not something that some guy who they've been speaking to for 45 minutes has said. Who needs that?
Yeah.
It needs to be
you're right.
their
You know,
answer.
No, you must have such a place of compassion and such understanding. I want to address the question here by Claire, because I think it's a very good question. How do you close off from all of the pain, the secrets, etc. at the end of the day?
I'm glad you said at the end of the day, because in the middle of the day you don't. You don't walk into the ocean without getting wet. That would require a real special kind of dissociation, right? Where you're in the midst of suffering and not feeling it. You'd have to be turned off in a very, it's not a good way. That would be my first sign of burnout. Right?
Yes.
If I'm not feeling it, then you know, it hurts.
Right. Yeah.
But at the end of the day, for most of my career, I've lived in sort of proximity that I could walk to work, walk home from work.
Right.
But a longish walk, you know, long enough and through green space that I separate sort of work mind and home mind.
Right. Right.
And during the course of the day, if something has tagged something in me, because we all have our own wounds and our own traumas and our own whatevers.
Right. Something triggers something within yourself as well, and you have to go there with yourself.
It's like, wow, I'm really activated around this. I can use my
and
walk.
why?
And why? All of those things. So you have to do your own self-work all the time. And that's not a one and done thing. You know, I did my self-work and now I'm here to help others. That's kind of like I showered once and now I'm here to
and now I don't smell.
I I did. It was 1984. It was fine. Yeah, no, shower today.
Exactly. And shower every day. No, it's true,
Yeah.
you know.
And
That
on a
must be
really
so,
bad day,
so fun.
if the work is, or if the walk isn't enough, then there have been moments where a shower is exactly the thing. You literally just,
Let the
pour
water
it
do
off.
it. Yeah. So now, with regards to all of that, and that's a very good question that sort of leads me into, let's talk about your storytelling, because I have a feeling that your storytelling is part of that catharsis to get everything off. It's like having a good shower and taking a good walk through the woods and stuff. It brings you to who you are at core. And this is
Oh
what makes
yeah.
you right within yourself. And that's you, your your creative side. So take me down there. Take me through that and tell us about your storytelling. And am I on the right path when I'm saying these things? Because I have
I
that sense
think
that that's
so.
what it's
Yeah.
like for you.
Yeah. It's storytelling when it's being done right, or when I'm doing it right. It feels like a trance state. Like it's just its own space. Even though I've told casually my whole life, I really started taking it seriously in 2012. And the first time I got up to tell, like with a mic in front of a bunch of people, I remember getting up. I remember going to the mic. I remember sitting down. And at the end,
And what happened in between?
apparently I told a story and it was okay.
And it was okay, just okay.
Well, I had practiced it a bit, so, but yeah, it was my first one. It was okay.
Nice,
The
nice.
the first story I told was the Voyage of Bran, which is one of the oldest Irish stories we have. It's from the 7th century, and it's the story of a man, a king, who he's walking the ramparts of his castle, and he hears a voice that's behind him, and no matter which way he turns, she's always behind him. And eventually he falls asleep, and he wakes up with this branch with golden apples on it, and this leads to an adventure, and he goes out into the sea. And I think that to me, this is a fairly spiritual story. It's framed in a Christian context for the most part, but he and his men travel out to sea, and they come to an island. There's an entire genre of Irish stories called Imram or Imrama, and it just means voyaging or rowing about. And they get to this island, and they see people there that are just laughing and smiling and pointing, and they. Um, no, sorry. First, he meets a threshold figure. He meets the god Manannan Maclir, the god of the sea and the headlands.
The gatekeeper.
And that opens up into seeing otherworldly places. And then he gets to this island where everyone is laughing. Two of his men jump off board to join them. And the minute they stand on the island, they also start laughing and cheering. And, it's like everybody's super high. Not the words used in the original story. But they have to leave them there because there's nothing that they can do. Like they're just so intoxicated with this ridiculousness. And then they go to a second island called the Land of Women, and they're more careful about getting on or getting off the boat and onto the island. But one of the women throws a ball of yarn, and when Bran catches it, just sort of out of impulse, it sticks. And with a single thread, she pulls him into the shore, and they
he's
stay
done for.
there. He's done for. They have. It's a better island. It's an island with no pain and no sorrow, and it's all good things. But when they eventually get homesick and try and go back to Ireland, 300 years has passed, and when one of the guys try and step off the boat, he falls to ashes. And so, because he ages all at once, like,
Right. Right.
And then Bron just has the people just push the boat back out, and off he goes, and that's the last you see of him, who sails off into history. And there's beautiful poetry in it, and there's some other good things happening, but the notion of, even after we've experienced the gatekeeper, we can either do the full length of work and get deep knowledge, or we can get the superficial knowledge, the stuff that delights us but doesn't do anything.
It just
right?
entertains us.
Yeah. And so I think that sometimes our spiritual paths can be like that.
Yes.
And I'm not pointing at any particular path. Like, anybody can use one in a bad way.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
and they get stuck. And they get
they
stuck there. And and it's all about the glitter and the crystals, etc. Right? I was gonna, Claire again has got another wonderful question, because I wanted to sort of bring that storytelling to, again, your ancestral roots, the Irish, and you actually speak you speak the Irish language. But before we do that, I just want to address Claire's question. Do you ever journal your feelings? I'm sure you do. I think you do.
I actually don't. Not often and not well. I recommend it to a lot of other people, but I am terrible.
Brian, I thought for sure you would. Good question, Claire. Really?
I'll talk it out, or I'll talk it out in my head.
Okay.
But I don't write much, and I find writing very hard.
Really?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
interesting.
Like, I compose a thing. I wouldn't say that I write a story.
No.
Even if I'm taking jot notes. I find writing just agonizing.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. No, I agree, Claire. Oh, wow. Yeah, no. And see, I would never have thought that, Brian. There, I learned something about you.
Oh,
so,
yeah. Without a good editor, anything I've written is a nightmare. Now, if you're just journaling, like journaling for your own consumption, then that's fine.
Yeah, that's different.
But for somebody else, like if my husband doesn't take a good look at what I put out there, it's not fit for human eyes. Things go unconjugated, and this is in English. Like, things are just. The worst thing is I'll drop the word "not" from a sentence, which of course inverts I lose small words. I'm not great on the page. And so I need a lot of help to do that.
I hear you. So so now my other question to you is, obviously, stepping onto your path, your spiritual path, and discovering your roots, because you wanted to have those roots. And so I know you were led by your gods to the Irish part of you. And this is what led to you being able to speak. And you speak Irish. So,
I hear you. I would compose something, but I don't write too much. Yeah.
Okay. So take me through your Irish language, as opposed to, okay, I know when someone says I speak Irish or whatever, I go, oh, you mean like Gaelic, right? And we would be incorrect, right? Because we had that conversation privately. So tell me a little bit about that, and finding the history of your roots, and how was that different from your Scottish roots, speaking Gaelic there? Explain that for me.
I'll be right back. I just have to check on the little kitty. We'll be right back.
Okay.
No worries. So just what are the different languages like, or my journey with the language, or what is it with
your journey
the
and the difference?
Yeah. So I think that it's a really, this is advice that I would have given myself back in '88 and failed to. If you've got an opportunity to learn a language young, do it. I started learning Irish as part of my Celtic Studies degree, and I did just enough to do the thing, to tick the box, to carry on, because I was all about the stories and not about the language, because the stories were actually in Old Irish anyway. I had lots of reasons, and you can't tell a 20-year-old anything. At least you can't tell me at 20 anything. But if I could have gone back and really dug down then, because what I'm doing now is really digging down. But it's never too late. It's never too late.
No, it's never too late. My mom always said it's always good to know another language, no matter, you know, when or where you pick it up, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So right now, my language is pretty remedial, but it's enough to write a simple prayer, or it's enough to. I was telling you that I read a short murder mystery across.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, I mean, it was a murder mystery, so it was written for adults. But if you look at the level of writing inside, it was probably aimed at a grade 4, grade 5 level. Like, I've also got Harry Potter in Irish, and I find that just a breath above my capacity. Or a newspaper, Irish language newspaper. I'm hit and miss. So that tells you, right, like, that's the upper end of my.
No, hey, that's pretty good, you know.
Yeah, but the act itself to me is an act of devotion, and the more I know, the more I weave it into my storytelling, in a way that's still useful for an English-speaking audience. At some point, I'd like to be able to tell, you know, a whole story in Irish to an Irish audience in a way where they only laugh at the funny parts. Like, that would be a goal.
Instead of laughing at you.
Yeah, I want them to laugh with me. Though all the Irish speakers I've met have always been very kind, so it's okay. They would let me make a mistake or two, of course.
That's good. They're kind then. I was gonna say, my mom, when I would speak Polish or read Polish, she would just sit there and she would laugh. And I know it's not because of what I was saying, or, you know, the story or whatever. It was, you know, she, instead of correcting me, she'd let me fumble through it. And she goes, "What are you saying?" I'm like, "Oh, stop," you know. But it's hard, you know, like when, and it's funny because my first language was Polish as opposed to English, even though I was born here, right? But learning a language, speaking it, writing it, and if you're not constantly doing it, you fall out of practice.
Oh, absolutely.
And is that the same thing for you? Like, how do you practice to continue your Irish, you know, and speaking it and that? Do you go to like Irish pubs and speak?
No, I would find that so frustrating because it moves so fast. I've got a novel that I'm reading, and so I read a little bit every day, even if it's just a couple of pages, and so that keeps me in tune. I've got an intermediate level book that I'm going through on my own, like a language learner's book that has audio as well, so getting used to the sounds, and so it's just a matter of sort of picking away at it on my own. And there's some really amazing modern literature written in Irish. There's fun stuff that's been translated into Irish, like Dracula and The Hobbit and whatever. But then there's also things that are like written first in Irish that are amazing, that are worth. Like, it's something to aim for. And it doesn't sound like it's related directly to my spiritual path, but it is related to the larger cultural pursuit that the spirituality is woven in with.
Right. Totally. So I'm going to ask you to give us an example of a story. If you can share a story, because we were talking privately, and I know we had spoken about one of your, would you call it your patron deity, Lou?
Yeah.
Could you give us a story, because obviously that is something that would, you know, come very natural to you. So would you like to share a story with us? Before I hand you over to Jean-Jerome, I want a story.
Sure. Yeah, that would be fine. Let's see. Being seated is kind of strange. I usually tell standing up, and I'm just going to stay down here because otherwise you'll just see my knees. But I swear my stories actually live 5.5 feet above the ground.
I was going to say, yeah, or you could stand up and walk and do your storytelling.
No, that's okay.
Whatever.
That's okay.
Okay.
So here's a story that that we tell, at least in my particular tradition, we associate it with the winter solstice. Because in some traditions, the winter solstice is all about the rebirth of the sun. In ours, it's not. The sun is in our tradition, the sun is a goddess, and some of the things that happen around the winter solstice are about the things that are born in darkness. It's the things that have their beginnings in the dark places, right?
Yes.
And my God is one of them. So
nice.
Sometimes stories start Vi Shina Nagasfado Vi Damensh. Oh, no, this is the part that I'll need to peek at. Anytime a storyteller looks at their stuff, you know it's bad. But this is not one of my usual starts. But I want to share it with you because it's beautiful. And then I'll start it my way. I just love the rhythms of this right here.
And I love the sound of it.
Yeah. So sometimes traditional stories will start Vi Shina Nagasfado Vi Damensha An Anurshan Nivensha and Sha Anish. And it's got this rhythmic, you can almost hear like a pattern like the ocean in it. But
I was just gonna say like the ocean. Yes.
But the meaning is sort of more prosaic. There was a time, and long ago it was, and if I were there then, I wouldn't be here now. So it's light and it's playful, but then the rhythm of it has a whole other level. But instead, I'll start this one. Fado, fado, noravi tuadidanan, najihaid fain, in Argoni in Aaron. Long, long ago, when the Tuadidanan, the gods themselves, lived in Ireland. Ireland belonged to the gods. Well, almost. You see, alongside the Tuadidanan, the shining tribe of the gods who descended from the northern heavens, there were also the Fomor, often terrible giants, who arose from the abyss itself. And among these giants was a king named Balor. And Balor was terrible to behold, but more terrible still if he beheld you. For he had one eye, he had another eye, but he had one eye that was so big it took 4 men with hooks and chains to lift the lid. And if you saw that eye, it was terrifying, but more terrifying still if he beheld you, because this poisonous eye would strike down all that it looked at. He had a wife named Cachlin of the Crooked Tooth. She was called that because she had one tooth that was so long and twisted that she could use it as a cane. They were a hard and terrible couple. But among their children was one as fair as they were foul, and her name was Enya, which means kernel or seed. And Enya was kind and gentle and beautiful and wise. But it had been prophesied that should Enya ever bear a child, it would be a son, and that son would be the death of her father. So Balor took Enya, and he brought her to an island in the north of the world. And there he built a tower of glass, and on top of that tower of glass, he built a crystal bower. And in that crystal bower, he put Enya, with only her handmaidens to keep her company. and around the base of the tower he set guards, so that no man would ever approach his daughter. And so it was, and so it would have been. Except it came to pass that Balor stole a magic cow from the Tuatha Dé Danann, the glass goblin. She was an amazing beast that made green any field she entered. She was never without milk, and all of the other cows around her would become more fertile just by her presence. He had stolen this child by transforming himself into a red-headed 10-year-old boy. But that's a story for another time. He'd stolen this cow, and he needed a place to hide it. Well, he already had one hiding place, so he brought the cow to the north. He brought the cow to the island, now called Tory Island for the tower that was there, into the Tower of Glass, and up into the Crystal Bower. Well, it wasn't long before the Tuatha Dé Danann noticed the absence of such an amazing beast, and so they sent Cian, whose name means enduring, to look for it. Well, Cian looked in the north and in the south, in the east and in the west. He looked around the edges and he looked into the center of Ireland, and he couldn't find that cow anywhere. As enduring as he was about ready to give up when Birog found him. Birog of the Mountain, she was a druidess of great fame and great frame. And she looked at him and she said, I know where the cow is. And he was delighted to hear that. And I know how you can get it. And he was delighted to hear that. Because Birog had a plan. She reached into her bag and she pulled out one of her own dresses. Now, Cian was tall and Cian was broad in the shoulder, but so was Birog. The dress fit just fine. She put that dress over Cian, and she did his hair in a womanly style, and she pinched his cheeks and she stained his lips so that they could get close to the tower without being spotted as a woman and a man. And then she raised her hand and she wafted them away on a druidic wind. When they reached the island, the gravelly shore crunched under their feet, and as they walked toward the Tower of Glass, they saw the guardsmen, and the guardsmen saw two women approaching. And as the two women approached, just as one of the guards was about to say, "Wait a minute," Birog waved her hand, and all of the guards fell into a deep druidic sleep. And Cian went into the tower. He went into the Tower of Glass, and he went up and up and up to that crystal bower. And there he found the magic cow. But that's not all he found. He also saw Enya. He saw her, and she saw him, and they immediately fell in love. He tore off his womanly clothes, and he started to rush toward her when all of her handmaidens stepped between him and her. And one of them looked at him. The bolder of the handmaidens stepped forward and said, looking at him up and down, half-dressed, "We are here to protect our mistress from the advances of men. But we too have been in this crystal bower, in the glass tower, in an island in the north of the world for a very, very long time. So if you can sleep with each of us in turn, you may, after a time, sleep with your beloved." And so, some stories say that she had 9 handmaidens. Some say she had 12. There's another version of the story that says Enya had 900 handmaidens. But Cian really was enduring. And so, after a time, he and Enya were able to lie together. And after a little more time, he was able to sneak out of that tower with the glass goblin, with the magic cow. Well, when Balor found out that that cow was missing, he was furious. The skies darkened, the earth shook. But he was even more furious when he discovered that Enya and all of her handmaidens were all quite pregnant. He brooded and he raged. Blizzards covered the north, and the sea was choppy and terrible. He looked over the whole of the land with that baleful eye of his, all to no avail, until all of the children were born, and he conceived of a plan. They were conceived all together, and they were born all together, and Balor was ready. He brought men with coracles, ships, and he had them gather the children in sheets. They were gathered in sheets with stones in the bottom of the sheets, and they were rowed out to sea. Bundle after bundle of baby was rowed out into the cold, dark North Atlantic Sea. But as the last bundle of babies was put into the last coracle that was about to be shipped out, one little hand reached out from between the folds and undid the pin that was holding it, and one little body slipped himself out and between the rocks. And as that last boat was rowed out to the sea, to a whirlpool in the darkness, Birog had been waiting on the shore. And she picked up that child, and as she looked out at the sea, and she saw the bundles and bundles of babies thrown into the dark North Atlantic, she again sang a druidic spell over the water, and each and every one of them were transformed into seals. Seals whose descendants to this day can still be found in the north of the world. And that island, Tory Island, can still be found, and that bay, Port Nadelig, is still named for the pin that was opened there. The Tower of Glass can't be seen anymore, but Enya's crystal bower can still be seen high in the northern sky, and around her circle all 900 of her handmaidens, the circumpolar stars. So it was that the child of promise was born. So it was that the child of promise was saved. Birog brought the baby to Cian, and Cian brought the child to Teltu, whose name means great land. She was for Bullock. They were a tribe that were neither Tuatha nor Fomor, and she raised that child in secret, her and Manannan Maclear. And he was raised with the help of warriors and druids and artisans until he was skilled in every art and well prepared for his destiny. Now it would come to pass that someday he and Balor would meet on the battlefield, and he would take Balor's head, and he would use that baleful eye to drive the rest of the Fomor into the sea. But that is a story for another time. May those who have heard this tale be blessed by its telling.
Wow. Wow. You know, it's funny. Listening to you, I could see within my own mind the whole story being revealed. It's like when you actually read a book and you have your own story in your mind. And it's so nice when someone actually reads to you, because it allows you to sort of drift off and see that story unfolding in its own particular way for yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
No, I love storytelling. You know, truth be told, okay, a private little thing that me and my first ex-husband used to do was he used to read me stories before I went to bed.
Nice.
And I used to always tell him, I go, here, pick a book, any book, and read to me. And he would read to me, and I would drift off into sleep just like a little kid, right? And I loved it because I could picture
wonderful.
Yeah, and I could picture every one of the things until I probably went off into dreamland and you know, snored away and whatever and got up in the middle of the night. But no, you have a lovely voice, Brian, and honestly, it's enthralling just to listen to you. You know, I could, you know, you could tape some stories for me and I'll play it, and then I can fall asleep at night.
Well, at some point, I would like to put something together with a little quiet music in the background, or just the sound of
Yeah,
the sea, right? I don't think
yeah.
anybody's copyrighted the sound of the sea. I could use that. Yeah.
No, absolutely. No, definitely, definitely. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I saw, sorry, Jean-Jerome, I missed all the people, making comments
Oh,
on the
there were some kind words
storytelling.
popping up, and I appreciate each and every one of them. Thank you.
No, I love it. No, definitely, definitely. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for
You're
that.
very
Thank you for
welcome.
sharing that. I love that. And now I'm going to hand you over to Jean-Jerome, who I know he has his own questions, and I know you guys are going to delve deep into some stuff. So take it away.
Okay,
All right,
great.
Brian. Well, thank you. Melvin says that was darn good,
Yeah,
and
wonderful. Thank you.
says beautiful. So
Yeah.
I'll see who that is
I
later.
appreciate it.
So
Yeah.
there's definitely a place for those stories. Oh, there's another one. That was a great from Carmela. That was a great story. Thank you so much. I remember my dad usually told
Usually,
stuff around the fires in wintertime. Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
Good
Oh,
story.
wonderful. Yeah.
And of course, the best stories are around fire pits, right?
Well, that's our original hearth and our original altar, right?
Yeah,
That little fire pit.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I love this particular story because even though it's not really about the seals,
No.
I like the fact that that the casualty rate in this story is not 900 children. Like that would just not be okay.
Yeah,
Um,
no kidding. I was like, oh my
yeah,
God, 900 children. And I was thinking Trump right in my
yeah,
head.
yeah, yeah. But no, they all become seals. They live a different world.
Yes,
But
that's right.
in the Welsh version of the story, there are only two children. Uh,
Oh,
there's one child born, and he immediately jumps up and runs into the sea, and he's never seen again. Like he just dives in. He is ready for life under the waves. And then the second thing that falls out is this little lump, and that lump
uh-huh.
is put into a chest by a magician, where he waits for it to be ready, and then pulls it out, and it's Lou, or the Welsh
Oh,
version,
okay.
Llw. But there's
Okay.
still that one in the deep and one in the like. There's
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
going on there. Um,
Yeah. The
but I
water.
think, yeah, with the water, and I think consciousness is like that too, though, right? Like how
Yes, it
much
is.
of us is just under the water, and how much of us can we pull out? If we can get 1/900th of us out, well, great, it's a start. Uh,
And that's the whole point of meditation, and especially like transcendental meditation,
mm,
when I've gone 2 years ago to try to do, is actually going deep within and bringing that up to the surface, And it's a
mm.
little bit of a story that comes from within yourself, you
Oh,
know?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
So,
thank you. So, Jean-Jerome, what are you thinking about?
Oh,
yes.
I've got a list. So Brian, one thing I wanted to start off with, there's quite a few themes or basic areas where I wanted to sort of go into a little bit deeper. And also I want to, I'm going to post in a moment a question from Beth, which is sort of related to one of my questions. In that beautiful story you narrated, there's several references and to the word druid, druidic,
Mm,
druid.
yeah, because
And
Birog is the druid there. Yeah.
Virag, so the question is, in your own research and in terms of the composition of these stories, were these stories or some of these stories associated with, and you'll see where I'm going with this. Yeah, I think you'll know where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
Were some of these stories and ancient tales, the language itself, were they in some ways associated with the Druids? And was the name Druid really a name used in Irish, or was there another term used?
Okay. Yeah. It's because literacy came late. We were often guessing.
Okay,
But with these guesses, there are still better and worse guesses, right? Because some people will say, oh, if we don't know for sure, anything goes, but
right.
that's not the case. What we do know from the medieval period, from the 4th century all the way through to the 1600s and maybe even later, that there was, in English sometimes the word bard is used, but there's a class, a phila class, and phila has the same root as vision in some ways. That V, phi, that sound, it's the visioning word anyway. But these were the keepers of the of the storytelling tradition. And there were 9 grades of phila. The highest phila, the olive, that word is still used today for a professor. Like just a regular university professor is called olive, and the highest rank of bard, of phila, was called olive as well. And it would take at least 12 years to achieve that rank. And you would need to know like 250 stories, plus there was 100 other stories that we didn't get even a reference to, because there was inner and outer teachings, even in the Christian period. But it all rolls back into the original tradition. So there are some scholars who think that you would go through all of your phila training, which could take 12 years or more, and to become a druid, it could take 20 years. So the druids were the law keepers, but also the ones who had to oversee the rites. And some of this we have from classical sources, because in a lot of the folklore, especially the later folklore, we know from the histories that they were priests, but from the folklore they look more like magicians. And that could be because the two were sort of blurry together, in the same way that Siberian shamans, they're the priests of their people, but they kind of look more like magicians to our eye. Or it could be because like they just didn't write everything in, because it's being written after the fact.
Right.
But the interesting thing is that it was written down at all. So even though the stories were written down, changed, and some of the things that I treat as myth are technically folk tales or technically medieval romance, like the Arthurian material. I don't use, like, that would be the other island, but it's technically Irish medieval romance, but it points to themes and stuff that are from before. So the story that I just told is from a sort of a compilation of several folk tales that were gathered in the late early 1900s, where in our manuscript tradition, where we would get some of the older material, that entire story is one line. That's it. So I'm glad we got the folktale.
So just to recap, just again, so by what you described, from your research, from what you've been able to piece together, and understanding that some of these things, again, were oral traditions and mostly oral tradition till later in the Middle Ages, where some things began to be written down, but they were also then tainted by Christianity and other influences that would have, sort of shifted the focus, or possibly shifted some of the focus, the intent. But from what you described, the phila, that sort of initiatory, that sort of graded sort of level of phila. Eventually, if the phila mastered those interesting 250, we had the conversation, 250.
Yeah.
For all those sort of tuning in and that have some knowledge of Ifa has essentially 256 Odu Ifa, right? So we were talking about possibility. It's interesting that those stories are numbered around that same number of 250.
Yeah, we were talking about the Irish triads.
Exactly.
I'll get back to that. And there's 256 of them, and I was really excited because I thought it might be rooted in the same kind of binary system. And then I took a closer look, and I'm like, no, that's just as many as this guy gathered. It's not but it's still interesting.
But following that train of thought, so basically, again, as you sort of went through the ranks based on your your mastery of these stories as a Fila later in that journey, once you had sort of amassed that oral tradition and had an understanding of the pearls of wisdom that are sort of mined in those stories and those lessons with morals. And then we'll get into a little bit. You've mentioned that in some cases, those stories are chanted or narrated, but also with a form of blessing or as a form of wishing or even incantation in some way, maybe throwing that up. But ultimately, later on, only after mastering those stories was that they would be considered for the druid class. Is that an accurate sort of summary?
Yeah. I mean, that wouldn't be. It's not the only theory out there, but it's the one that I subscribe to. And because I can't imagine two parallel streams of story studying. One that dead ends at one level at 12 years, and the other one that keeps going. So they kind of build off of each other. Is one of the ways that it may have worked. And the stories themselves, even though they were changed by Christianity, that was also the only way they would have been recorded at all. Like if you look at France, if you look at Gaul, none of those stories were recorded at all. That was the other option, is just losing it all. But what happened in Ireland is, because these stories were so important as legal precedents, as part of the histories of important families, it was really integrated into the whole of the culture, and so you ended up with a kind of dual tradition that was going at the same time. So one of the stories that didn't, we were talking about this, one of the stories that didn't get covered or get recorded was the creation, because that would conflict with Genesis. But what they did is, if you think of the tree that is like biblical tradition, what they did is they took the Irish tradition and grafted it on right after Noah. And so the biblical tradition keeps going here, and right after Noah, there's this jut off, and some people end up in Ireland, and then the Irish tradition carries on from there. So it's like they took the Irish, if the Irish tradition was a tree, they cut it from its root, but then regrafted it onto the biblical root, and did some really elaborate things that gives you the exact date of when the Tuatha arrived, according to a biblical calendar. One of the other favorite things that comes out of that sort of collection of things, I mean, there's a whole bunch of really wonderful sacred stuff, but then there's some silly stuff, like the Tower of Babel story.
Yes.
Where all the languages are broken apart.
Yes.
Well, the Irish sent people all over the world to gather the best of all languages and pulled it together, and that's what became Irish. Like, it's this medieval, it's like, really? Like, but it's hilarious. So they, even though they were not above changing things in their home tradition to suit biblical needs, they kept a lot because of the legal precedent. And at the same time, they were not above doing the same shenanigans to the biblical tradition to just, we're the people who have the stuff. You need to know that, right? So it's kind of wonderful. And so in the midst of all of this seriousness, there's also these elements that you can't help but laugh. Like, that is delightful. And that's a part of the tradition, that alongside these serious things is a lot of humor, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But Jean-Jerome, you were asking about the blessings. There's a thing that's found at the end of some Irish stories that, like at the end of the Toin Baculna in its manuscript form, the Toin Baculna is this big cattle raid story. It's sort of the Irish Iliad, but being Irish, they're not chasing after someone named Helen. It's about cattle, because of course it is. And at the end of it, it says, one of the three blessings of the Toin Baculna is 1 year of protection to anyone who has heard it.
Right.
And at the end of another portion of the manuscript, it says the a blessing to all who memorize memorize this in this form and put no other form upon it. So they're trying to make a conservative effort to hold it in one place, which is funny because they changed it in writing it down to begin with. So there's a bit of, if I ask you not to change something, but that I just changed it, the ink isn't even dry yet.
Right.
So there are complexities in the culture, right? But what culture doesn't have those?
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned the Tower of Babel and that sort of link. Now this is really expanding. There's a lot of material to cut here. In the Odu Ifa, in the Afro-Cuban text, Ofumba Trupum, we talk about essentially the Tower of Babel. There's a reference to the Tower of Babel in the Odu Ifa Ofun Otrupum in the Afro-Cuban text. But
right.
what I'm getting at with that is, it's interesting because we have that in the Yoruba, Afro-Cuban Yoruba under Ofumba Trupum. The flood again is mentioned in Oyekumei, right, which is the big flood where essentially all life stopped, and then it started up again. So there's mention of that. Also, other references to that flood in Osarete and other Odu Ifa. But interesting, in the story, you actually very eloquently narrated. And now you talk about this other sort of mention of the story, the symbol of a cow, the symbol of a bull or a cow, seems to be very prevalent or present in these stories. And it's interesting because when you look at, the divine bull was a symbol from Babylon and was a symbol from in Mesopotamia. So you begin to wonder, say, okay, how much of the the joke is there some truth in that some of the ancient Mesopotamian and Babylonian religions or beliefs, especially when it came to divinities and the association of certain animals or totems to the divine, like the cow, like the bull, sort of happened to make their way over to Ireland, right? Especially after the decline of those civilizations, and trading, through trade or through, when they're looking for refugees or what have you, right? Like just over time, it sort of went over to Ireland. So I find that interesting that the two stories you mentioned have that symbol, right, and linked it to the divine. The other thing I wanted to sort of, again, also the commonality in so many cultures, whether Nordic, Germanic, and other the concept of giants, earthbound deities or divinities, oftentimes associated as being, I wouldn't say demonized, but there's possibly an element of that from Christian, influences or overtones, but definitely a major force and a force of primordial importance in terms of usually the primordial gods are, whether you call them titans or whether you call them the giants or whatever term is used in the culture, that they play or the giants in Nordic tradition, right? That there's definitely a common correlation or common theme that exists, right? There's that presence. So it kind of brings me to a question that Beth had, which basically says, in this concept of gods or list of gods, there's quite an ample pantheon which is described within the Irish or gods. Beth had asked, because you mentioned an affinity with the god Lu. How did you? She's asking, how do you identify your patron? So which sort of ties into my other question. Now, when you have the stories, you have a little bit of the seeds of the cosmology that you mentioned, that it was sort of grafted on, but they sort of found a way to link it back, so you get at least an inkling of what it was before Christianity. What method of divination, or is it through clairvoyance? Is it through some other ogam or some other method or is it through reading entrails, which was, I believe, a very common practice within the both human and non-human, which was a common practice to foretell the future. How does that survive today? And in your particular own practice or your own sort of study of this, how do you seek, further spiritual insight as opposed to archaeological or historical or literary?
Yeah, so you just sort of had a whole range of
Oh,
things
yeah.
there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to go all the way back and start with the cow.
Okay.
I was going to encapsulate, sorry for interjecting, I'm sorry for interrupting. I think what Jean-Jerome is basically saying, so do you read entrails? Okay.
No, I'm a city boy.
Okay.
Now, if I were a farmer and if I were versed in that way, then I don't know. I can't speak to what that would look like. But as a city boy living with a vegetarian, no, there will be no reading of entrails. But the cow is a very central figure, and one of the primary deities, the goddess of the River Boyne, which is one of the important rivers of Ireland. Bowen, her name literally means white cow, and that bow word is the bovine word. In India, there are the Govinda is a similar. Govinda is basically a white cow again, and the Milky Way is called Belach na Bohinia, so it's the way of the white cow. And so there's a river in heaven and a river on earth, and so she is also called Enya, the same Enya that was in the story. So there's sort of a celestial her, and then Bowen is sort of her terrestrial form, and then in freeing the waters of the Boyne River, which is actually freeing all the waters of the world, kind of like that story where Yemaya has a really bad day. And the oceans are born, like that. Different causation, but anyway, she releases the water, and she becomes Drumhlajalen, the roof of the ocean. And so she has a celestial, an earthy, and an oceanic form, but she's still Bowen. And the cow itself is central. There's a lot of really important cow and horse symbolism. The cow mother and the it's a very spiritual animal, absolutely. So the cow mother and the horse lord are the two that get together. The fire and the water are the two that get together for the birth of Angus. Angus's name means uniqueness of power, and he is the child of fire and water. He is he's love and beauty and youth. Imagine if Eros did Apollo's job, except for the sun stuff. He'd be that. And so he has this impressive union of two very different things coming together. So the cow is really vital. And a lot of our stories, sort of, you can see from India across to Ireland, not so much the Near East. Like there's a different language group that does the Near East and then down into Africa. But everyone was talking with everyone. I mean, Phoenician tin traders were talking with the folks in the British Isles. And so I don't want to make a really hard split, but the Indo-European languages from India through Iran and then up into all of those countries and the rest of Europe, except for the Basques and the Finns, they've got their own thing going on. They all have a similar storyline, and that's where you get the Azuras and the Devas, or Jean-Jerome, you mentioned the Norse comparisons. I think of the Fomor as very much like the Jotnar. And the Tuatha Dé Danann are very much like the Asir, and the Firbolg, they're very earthy. They're very much like the Vanir.
Exactly.
And so you get the same three sets, and Tailtu, the one who takes the child away to his foster mother, her name is the same name as the Roman Tellus. Tellus, like the phone company, Tellus. That's the Roman name for Gaia.
Oh.
So Gaia was called Tellus, and Tellus is the same name as Tell-2, not because they were borrowing from each other, but because they share a primordial root. In the same way that the Irish god Nectan is the Roman, is linguistically, I'm not going to say the gods are equivalent, but is linguistically similar to Neptune, or in India, Apam Nepat. Right? There's these connections that now some people are lumpers and some people are splitters as far as, you know, everything is different or everything is, and I'm not going to.
You're not going there.
I'm not going. Well, not tonight. Sometimes I'm a lumper and sometimes I'm a splitter, but yeah. So yeah, though that addressed the first two things that you mentioned, Jean-Jerome. The third thing was just, what was the third thing?
Divination.
Right,
So
because there's always three things.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So
all about the three.
All about the three. Yeah. My own practice of divination, I don't do too much formal divination, to be honest. When I do, I'll use Ogham staves sometimes, especially at Samhain. We'll do our yearly divinations. Some modern methods like the Druid Animal Oracle. Like, I love the pictures on the cards. I'm not a fan of what's in the book as much, but the cards are fantastic. The book sometimes is looking at lore in a way that I might look at lore, and other times there'll be like an entire paragraph talking about the goddess, and I'm like, who? Because if you're talking about Bowen, or if you're talking about Morrigan, the goddess, you know, those two have very different characters, and so it's drawing from a different thread than the one that I pull on. So, but I do like those cards. Often it's just a sense of knowing, or watching omens. You know, like an incredible flight of birds erupting on my walk to work or something. Sometimes that's very meaningful, and sometimes it's just a flock of birds. You have to not overread these things sometimes. Occasionally there's some important dream work, or I'll do whether I'm actually sleeping or not. It's a kind of incubation. It looks like sleeping, to try and find some answers. And on a personal level, I think astrology is kind of interesting, so I'll use some of that. But we don't have some good, strong evidence for Irish astronomy. There's some really interesting stuff from the Neolithic period before the Celts arrived. But there's not a lot of really strong stuff for during that period. And then when Christianity arrives, you get what was brought in from the Mediterranean, right? Because everyone was talking with everybody else. Nobody was like lost in their own little space.
And so Beth's written a paragraph here.
Yeah, let's take a moment and explore that.
Yeah, okay. I'm really interested in how you identify your patron. In Ifa, Orisha, that patron or patrons are identified through divinatory process. What I was asking is, how in your tradition do you identify your patron? Is it through divination, intuition, acclamation? Unless I gapped and you answered, I know certain Celtic gods, goddesses attract me, Lugh included, but I don't know if I can claim one as my own. I agree, Beth. Like, for me, I'm attracted to Lugh, but so yes, could you add?
Yeah. No, I can't answer that. Sorry. It's closer to intuition. Instead of, like, if you think of some of the traditions that have a really strong divination, the shells are cast and bam, that's kind of like an arranged marriage by a matchmaker who knows what they're doing. Like they're just discovering what's already there. And ours is more like a courtship process. There's a bit of dating around, you learn the stories, you get the feeling, and so it's a gradual, and you sort of grow into it. There might be a wonderful dream and a great aha moment, but in my practice, at least, we might have a conversation with somebody, facilitate them discovering who their patron is. But I wouldn't say, even if I'm like, yeah, you're Morrigan's, I would never say that. They have to walk around it. Like they need to come to it in an organic process that they own from the inside out. And that's just through intuition, through living day to day, put up a shrine, see how it works, that sort of thing. So there was one time with a young woman in UTPS, we were doing the same process, and it was her practice was more Greek oriented, but I was just using the practices that I know, right? And after a long period of many conversations, late at night after the UTPS events, we'd all of us would go to the pub, and then we'd be having conversations, and then finally she said, "Oh, I think now I'm really sure that it's Persephone." And I smirked, and she hit me on the shoulder, like, "You knew." And I think that wasn't my story to tell. Like, this is between the two of you. So it's a softer way of getting around to it. Just because our tradition doesn't arrive whole cloth. So it's not an unbroken lineage. There's not so we play with it a bit differently, and we're not as sure to. Thank you. I wouldn't want to be decreeing things left, right, and center. Like that wouldn't be. I don't have the backing to do that. It would not be appropriate, culturally speaking, right? Because we're a neo-pagan tradition, however we want to frame that. So it is what it is.
Right.
Okay.
So interesting. With regards to using divinatory, as you know, with the African traditions, a lot is with divinatory. And, when I look back to my own journey, and I instinctively knew it was sort of, I would say, I don't know if you would agree or not, Brian, almost a calling from one sort of deity. Like for me, it was always an attraction to Artemis, because I could associate with her, and there's that certain personal association and the personality traits, right? And would you think that would be something that you yourself would feel? That's what I call spirit coming into play, the spirit of Lu, or the spirit of Artemis, or the spirit of the divinity you always have known within yourself.
Yeah, that's the biggest part. And you will in some way share certain qualities and traits. When you come up with an answer, you might be startled, but it won't be because you're like, "Oh, I've never seen any of that in me." That won't be why. There'll always be something about you in that relationship, because we're ways of bringing forth certain mysteries and certain themes into the world. Right? So, it would be very unlikely that to skip pantheons for convenience, there aren't a lot of celibate children of Aphrodite out there. Or maybe there are for reasons that make sense in context, but as a general rule, there's some loving happening. And so I think that that's true for, doesn't matter what the tradition is. Like there needs to be a good match. You get the things that relate to your own.
No, for sure.
just in the interest of time, I want to cover off two more concepts or questions, but also one question from our audience. But before I read the one from our audience, when we spoke in private, we had talked about, again, the importance of language, words, concepts.
Yeah.
And we talked about the relationship between the elements of the body in Irish cosmology.
Right.
Yes.
I
Good
wondered
point.
if you wanted to touch a little bit upon that.
Yeah.
And
so
we were looking at, commonalities in terms of words or concepts. And one particular item, which kind of sort of follows from that, our discourse on divination and feeling and all that, is concept of fate and
Right.
fate, and things like words like in the Yoruba, like ori and ashe, and their equivalents. And I know that because of your focus on the storytelling, language is very critical in your sort of appreciation and your analysis of this tradition, right?
Right. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. The elemental piece that goes into the storytelling. Remember earlier I was saying that we had sort of a biblical tree with the Celtic stuff grafted on just after Noah, so there's no creation story. But in the margins of one of the manuscripts, and this happens twice, it happens once in Ireland and once in Wales, actually. The wording is slightly different, and of course, one's in Irish and one's in Welsh. But the monk, in his own hand in the margin, gives an alternative creation for Adam. In the Irish one, it says, and God rolled together some of the sky to make the head of honest Adam, and from the sun his face, and from the moon his heart, and from the sea his blood, and from the stones his bones, and from the earth his flesh, and from the wind his breath, and from the clouds his brains, and from the light in the deep, that is his Christianity. And I'm pretty sure I've got the order of those wrong, but you get the gist.
Yes.
And
No, I
so
like
we're
them.
shaped in the from the world. And it's the exact opposite of the Ymir story, where Ymir is torn apart to make the world, and his head becomes the sky, and he doesn't get the sun and moon stuff, but his blood becomes the sea, and his bones become the stone. So there's a general Indo-European myth that we probably had before that was covered over. You find it in Norse material, you find it in India, you find it in this marginalia in Ireland. But the word dul, or the plural is doula, means an element, a living being, or a thing created. And peripherally, it's related to the word for leaf, which I think is just charming, because the leaf is sort of put forth by the tree, right? I don't know if that's a pun or they're actually related, but they sound the same.
No.
So that's the doula word. So you are made in the shape of the whole of the world. So you're the microcosm, the world is the macrocosm.
That's right.
And in the stories, Ireland is like a mesocosm. It's a stand-in for the whole of the world, just like the body is. It's got 5 provinces around a center. There's something there. So when human beings arrive in Ireland for the first time, they're arriving into the world, basically, because it's sort of a middle cosmos between the microcosm and the macrocosm. So that's the doula word. What was the other one you were wondering about?
Well, we were talking about words, or you had a sort of within your research of Irish words, you had come across words like feeding, koi, dan. I'm probably butchering them.
Right. Yeah, that's all right. That's right.
And and you had likened the concepts to Yoruba concepts of ori, ashe, and I would add also the concept of destiny. Ori is a form of, as it relates to destiny.
Right. Yeah. So one of the Irish words for fate or destiny is dawn, and dawn is, if you go backwards in time and then back up another branch of the language tree, it's the same as the word donate. Dawn is that which is given. So donate comes from the Latin, but if you go far enough back in the Indo-European tree, dawn comes from that same early origin. So it's that which is given. So dawn is all of your skills or talents that you're born with, but it's also your fate or your destiny. And yet it's also a word that means that means boldness. So you have to seize it. It's not only what is bestowed, you have to get off your butt. And it's also the word for poetry. So there's with boldness, there's like the same word meaning all of these things. It's something that must be seized. It's something that must be spoken. It's something that you got to do, but it's also innately in you. It's been given to you to do. So there's a kind of both receiving and active quality in it. But there was I was mentioning a little proverb that says, "A man will not burn whose dawn it is to drown." So that one gives a very fateful notion to it. But it's usually not as brutal as all that. It's sort of a wide road that there are many ways to express your dawn. And if you express it well, you're doing all right. And if not, you're in, like, if it's a wide road, it's easy to avoid the ditch, but some people still end up in the ditch. So how do you...
Sounds very Reuben.
Yeah.
So how do I get out of the ditch when I'm in the ditch? Because we're all in the ditch sometimes. But how do I act on what is given?
Right.
Yeah. And so I just love that concept.
And what about the words feeding, koir?
Fearna.
Feeling
Fearna is just the word for truth. But when you live in truth, things are just better. Like there's one of our ethical texts that it talks about the truth of the prince, or the truth of kingship. And so when the king is good, the relationship with the realm is good. It's often mistranslated as his relationship with the land. The first person to say that was, at least in an Irish context, was in 1968. But it's really a relationship with the realm. Because if we think of land as actual land, right, there's also sea and sky and weather and all the things. But we've started taking the word land to mean more than land, right? In the same way that since the 70s, Gaia and the Gaia hypothesis makes her the whole planet.
Yes.
But in the original Greek stuff, Gaia is the sister to Uranos and Okeanos. She's only a third of land, sky, and sea. So she's not all the things. She's not the wind. She's not the forest. She is land. And I'm not minimizing land. That is important.
Yeah.
But yeah, Earth, not Earth as in the planet flying through space. Yeah.
Exactly.
And same with Teltu or Tellus. But yeah, to live in Fearna, the elements respond in turn. So a good king gives you social harmony as well as natural harmony. And when you've got a bad king, the society falls out of harmony and nature falls out of harmony. I mean, can you imagine a country where there's a leader who's so terrible that social systems fall apart and the police are turning against the people and kids end up in cages?
America with Trump.
I mean, that's a really, it's almost cartoonish in its perfection, as far as showing like the bad king. And in the stories that relate to Lou and that part of the story, there's he starts off as a hero, but there's somebody named Bresh, and his name is Bresh the Beautiful, and they tell you that Bresh means beautiful, but Bresh actually means clamor, loud noise, right? And exactly. And so he ends up being a bad king, and everything falls apart. We've got stories of good kings, but the stories with the bad kings are more fun because it's like, that's how it all falls apart. Note to self: don't do that.
I just want to make this is now that you introduce the political, just for the record, because it's been on my thing. Everybody's complained about Trump for 4 years. Imagine Cuba for 60 plus years.
I can only imagine.
60 plus years.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
The States couldn't handle Trump for 4 years. Imagine Cuba in 60 years where you have absolutely no right to anything, to freedom of speech, to your body, to your path in life, where you basically have to put your tongue where the sun doesn't shine for 60 plus years.
That is brutal.
So because Rainer is Baba Nelson's son, so, and he says, "You're right, brother." So for all those people that I just want to point that out. Don't forget
and
that
Poland
last year, but Poland
under
is all
communism.
Democrat, but Cuba is still 60 plus years.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The importance of good rulership, and that's what Farina points to. And Coir is a justice word, and it's about rightness as well. The harp that Dagda plays, it has the word Coir in its name. It's called four-angled music or harp of two songs, and it's what turns the seasons in a good way.
Right.
And when we don't have justice, we don't have, things turning in a good way. So the way we relate with each other, the way we relate to the environment, these things need to be done in a good way. Absolutely.
100%. 100%. Actually, that's a term for another show.
For sure, but it's there in the language, and it's there in other
now,
people's sacred language
there's
too.
There's a group in Cuba. Again, still after 60 plus years, their rights are being violated. They've been incarcerated. They're on a hunger strike. 13 people, and that's going on today.
Wow.
And there's demonstrations in Miami and everything else saying, like, come on, guys, 60 plus years. Right?
Yeah, I hear you.
So that's, I've been quiet on that subject for a while, but that just, that really, especially with Rainer, because I know that's been going on today, people are crying. People, a mother, in her 60s being beaten, her rights being taken, and the world is.
Yeah, that is brutal. And for all that I believe in, like a good strong separation between religion and politics, your religion should inform your values, and you need to act based on those.
Ashe.
Yeah, and that's justice and freedom and autonomy and care.
Absolutely.
Those things matter.
And I'll say this last week and I apologize for digressing.
No, bring it.
Now it's spirit speaking. 4 years with Trump, dictator, totalitarian, fascist, and everything else. No American wanted to tolerate that. Then how is it that the same groups that have cried out and attacked that Trump have been silent for 60 plus years with Cuba? So the fact that Cubans are not entitled to the same freedoms and liberties and all that the Americans are.
It's hard.
That's something to remember.
Yeah.
That's something to remember.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. Yeah. No.
That term.
I can feel the big feelings around that, because it deserves it.
No, because you get up to here with it, right?
Yeah.
For 60 years, everybody goes to Cuba. Everybody flies and has a beautiful vacation. They don't give a rat's ass about the freedoms and everything else in Cuba. Cuba is old and all that. The States, 4 years. 4 years.
Yeah.
For Trump. And for anything Trump has done, it pales to the hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children have died in the sea leaving Cuba.
I hear you.
Over decades.
Yeah.
The people in jails, the people and all that. So very interesting that comment come up. Queer.
Yeah, that's the justice word. So we were just talking about that. Yeah.
There we go. Queer. It's gonna be my new favorite word. Queer. Justice. Excellent. And Duile. Doula.
That's the element word that we were talking about. Yeah. So one dual, two doula.
Right.
Or in this case, 9, because it's the sky, sun, moon, cloud, wind, stone, greenery, sea, like all of those things.
Absolutely. Elemental. So, which brings me to the last, because I'm sorry, we're going a little bit over 9 minutes. I got a little bit
Oh no.
sidetracked on that political thing, but we're
Sometimes
talking
these
started
things
about
are
that.
important. You gotta give voice
That's
to
why.
truth. Yeah.
No, I'm telling you, especially with this, I think you have to speak the truth. Um, Images of water. You touched upon it. Interesting, very interesting that you touched upon the Imrana.
Yeah.
Imra,
Imram. Yeah. Imram or
Imra,
Imrama. That's the rowing
yeah,
about the water journey. Yeah.
the water journey, and that's also very prevalent. I don't know if I sent you a video, and I just wanted to get your thoughts. I don't know if you got a chance to see it from Erith Herger
Yeah. I
about.
didn't get a chance to see
Okay,
it today. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
he did a video, very interesting video, called "Crossing the Water: Old Norse Afterlife." The reason I'm
Ah.
bringing this up is you brought the
Yeah.
Imrama. The story talks about the Imrama, that journey of water, and the concept of animism in within the belief. In other words, it's not just, we use the term paganism,
Hmm.
but even in terms of the human body being composed of the elements, and that water, that journey of water to find, or to meet, or to journey to find spiritual beings. That was the subject of that one from Erith Herga,
Oh.
and
Okay. Yeah.
that was the concept about that. Unlike the Judeo-Christian or a lot where you go to heaven, you go somewhere else. That the spirit world is right here, right? And the water is always the crossing of water, and all that, and the journeys, or the audit to cross water, is usually implied that you can reach the underworld, or you can reach
The
um,
other world.
spirit world here, right here. You don't have to
Hmm.
go
Hmm.
Through the
outer
water.
space. You don't
Yeah.
have to, and so forth. So, is that your understanding within the stories, the composition of those 250? Is that, would you describe them as beyond just pagan, but almost also a very strong animistic component?
Yeah, as they were written, that
Right.
part can feel a bit thin. But if you scratch
Okay.
the surface, definitely, because they were written later, right? So you couldn't
Right.
say, Dagda is the sky, and because one of his names is Dergarik, which is like red eye, like that's the sun. So the sun is either the eye of the god of heaven, or she's a goddess in her own right,
Right.
or she can be both at the same time. Like, who am I to judge? But
Mhm.
the so everything is very animistic, but we
Right.
don't have the tidy tags that like with
Mhm.
the Orishas. It's easy to say with
Right.
Yamaya or Oshun. We can say that Dun is death, and he rules the land of the dead. He's very much sort of the Hades figure, also associated with bulls again. Uh, but then there are others that would be harder. Lu's name literally probably means oath. There was a time that it was thought to mean lightning, um, and that one still might have some legs, but maybe not.
Okay.
100 years ago, people were trying to make it mean shiny because they were trying to make everyone a sun god. That doesn't stand. But Oath is the most likely contender. But there's something about his relationship with wind and breath, and him fighting with Balor is associated with like August storms and
Right.
stuff like that. So Balor is the storm. Well, who's exactly the storm in this is hard to say, but there's something happening there. Just like with Thor and the giants when they fight, there's all the
Mhm.
things going on.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, but Lu would be more closely associated with Odin. You know, spear bearer, winged hat, leads the army of the good
Mhm.
guys against the bad guys. Like they share that whole thing, and they both get covered by Michael when the Christians come in and put churches on the shrines. So
Mm.
Good
so they
old.
both have a certain Michaeline quality,
I like Michael, Saint Michael. I don't have a problem with him.
Not at all, not at all. But yeah, to make a longer answer short,
Right.
um, at its core, it's animistic. But in the tradition, as it's handed to us, we need to be cautious in reconstructing it because we can jump
Yeah.
too fast.
Yeah. I understand. Understand.
Yeah.
Very good point.
Good
But the
point.
fact that Bowen is a river, like, and a cow, like, there's no doubt there. That's clear.
Yeah.
And then
Right.
there are other
Yeah.
stuff that it's harder to say. Yeah. But
Well-
one of my favorites, Mev, she's one of the sovereignty goddesses.
Right.
A king becomes king by marriage to sovereignty. And sovereignty she is that Firna quality. She is truth. She is justice. But Mev, who's one of the sovereignty goddesses, her name literally means she who intoxicates. And so she's the mead. It's the mead word, is her name. But how is that for a symbol of power? That on one hand, she gives the king power and he has to use it in truth and justice, but she's also she who intoxicates. Isn't that kind of what power does? So she has,
Yeah.
The dualistic.
She's both the goodness and the danger of so she's the essence of political power, and what's in a good cup. So and other things too, but like those are part of her nature.
The key elements, key components.
Yeah.
And
So I'm going to table one last question because I know we're abusing your time, Brian. It's just such a delight to have you with us.
It's been fun. Yeah.
Yannick asks, what about a person like myself that is 12% European, Scottish, Irish, and British? What form of oracle in these traditions, Ireland, for example, can I use to find which lineage and patron deity might be part of my family?
Yeah, that's not really how we use oracles. I mean, from an IFA point of view, the question is perfect. It makes perfect sense. But at our end, we don't do things in quite that way.
Right.
I wish I had a good answer. If you know who your Orisha is, see who shares those same mysteries. I mean, even if I'm a splitter and not a lumper as far as who's who, they would at least have the right vibe, right? It's kind of like if your dad's a carpenter and my dad's a carpenter, they probably have things to talk about. Maybe go that route if you want to, but I'm really just guessing here. It wouldn't be a divinatory piece so much as learning the stories and seeing what speaks to you, right? Like who were and they come as a package. So learning stories from some other about the different god or all the gods together.
Right.
That's the tribe of them. That's the set of relationships. So it's never time wasted. But for me, the answers are in the stories. But I'm a storyteller, so that's a terribly biased answer. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
And last question, and I promise, my word, from me at least, as we wrap up, because we're talking about ancestral eyes. We touched upon Irish gods. We talked about the stories, the elements. What about within the stories, the reverence, and in terms of your own spiritual journey, the awareness of your ancestral spiritual guide or main guide, or how do you define ancestors, or have you found the divine spirit or ancestors within the stories and for the Fila aspect?
Yeah, that's a hard one. Within a lot of versions of Celtic paganism, you'll hear about the gods, the ancestors, and the spirits of nature as a little triad. And those are an overlapping set because the god of the dead happens to be an ancestor, and certain gods happen to be powers of nature, and so it's not separate, but those three go together. Overlapping triangle or overlapping circles there. But for me, it's about primarily, in my practice, it's nature and it's the gods, and the ancestral stuff is not direct for me in the same way. It's about working hard to learn the language, working hard to gather the stories and to hold the stories, to understand, to value what they have valued, but to do it in a way that's contemporary and appropriate to today. And so I don't feel like I have like a particular ancestral guide, or if I do, like the first druid, Avergan, is fairly important to me, and that's one of the stories that I tell. And he has a poem that connects him with nature and those things. So, like, he would hold some of that quality, but whether he's a mythic figure or an ancestral figure, who can say? So in my own practice, like, there's not a great grandmother or something that I'm like connecting with in that way. It's more the ancestors as a whole host in some way, that just because of my own relationship with my own history, that it hasn't sort of shaken out that way. If you ask somebody else, you might get a different answer. But Avergan's one that I really quite like. His name means born of wonder or born of song. And he's the first human being to step onto Ireland when human beings arrive. The gods are already there, and humans arrive, and he's the first one off the boat, and his left foot is still in the sea, and his head is crowned with the sky, and when he puts his right foot on the land, he just erupts in this poem. And it's about 22 lines long, but I'm going to give it to you because we're already over time. We'll just keep going. He starts off, and the minute his foot touches the ground, he starts, I am wind on sea, I am ocean wave, I am roar of sea. I am the stag of 7 tines, I am a hawk upon a cliff, I am a shining tear of the sun. I am fairest among herbs, I am boar of boldness, I am a wide flood upon the plains, I am a hill of poetry, I am a word of skill. I am a god who sets the head afire with smoke. Who but I know the secrets of the unhewn dolmen? Who but I announceth the ages of the moon? Who but I know the place where falleth the sunset? On whom do the cattle of Tethra smile? Who calls cattle from the house of Tethra? What god, what troop, fashioneth edges in this fortress that rots? I am a spell upon a spear. I am a song upon the wind. And the wind was the first thing mentioned, so it just goes in a round, and it's like he just with this, so that puts ancestor and nature and again the gods, like, it just one thing is never only itself.
Very
shamanic.
It definitely has that ecstatic quality to it. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Right, after all. I want that for my eulogy. Oh, nice.
Hopefully not for many years, Beth. Hopefully not for many.
Indeed.
Well, thank you, Brian. It's been a distinct pleasure. I mean,
yes. Thank you, Brian.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed myself, and it's always great chatting with both of you.
Oh, thank you. No, I'm very glad that you came. And of course, this is Beth's 2 furry children.
Oh, adorable.
They've been watching our show.
And there's Titi.
For months, they've been watching our show religiously. There are more.
Good. I hope they're learning a lot. Yeah.
More like furry friends.
Wonderful.
Oh, cute. Very cute. Now, before you go, Brian, we always ask our guests for a life quote. And I like your life quote. And Beth, I think you're going to like this one. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to think of a different one tomorrow, and I'll be like, I should have used that. But for now, it's one of the Irish triads, and it's 3 candles that illuminate every darkness: truth, nature, and knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Okay, you all have a wonderful night.
Thank you, Brian, for coming on. I appreciate it. We finally got you, and I'm glad. So thank you so much for coming. It's funny, Beth. Yeah, Beth messaged me and said, I was wondering when you were going to ask Brian, and I said, Beth, I've been trying since the show started.
You were very diligent, and my schedule's been a zoo, so thank you for bearing with me. Yeah.
No, and like I said, I'm grateful that you were able to come on. I really am, and I'm so glad that you did. Thank you so much, Brian. It means a lot. It really does. And thank you. Yes, and Melvin, speaking of the horned god, the cow, the cattle, There's our friend Melvin. He loves that. Every time I
That
see
is
that
a
little
great
horned head, I
image.
always go, "Hey,
Yeah.
Melvin!" Thank you, Melvin.
Okay. Everybody,
And
thank you very much
yeah.
for tuning in. We
Yes.
love you all safe, and we wish you much health, long life. A special prayer to a
Yes.
significant other of our good friend Ken Allen. We're hoping prayers for him, for his partner who is very, very
Kevin's
sick.
story,
Kevin's story,
who's
who's
had a
in
stroke.
hospital,
Mm.
who's had a stroke. So our prayers, may the Orisha, the divinities, the Irish gods, the ancestors, and the elements support him and give him full healing and full
Absolutely.
restoration. And our prayers and our best wishes are with you both.
Yeah. Ken Allen, we're sending prayers your way to Kevin and in hopes of his recovery. Okay.
Sure.
So I wish everybody would just take a moment after the show and just send some good healing vibes to him. Okay.
Sure.
So thank you. Thank you once again, Brian, and thank you, Jean-Jerome, for doing such a wonderful job behind the scenes as always. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. Everybody stay safe, please.
Absolutely.
I know we all still have to wear the mask. Stay safe, and we'll get through this. We really will. All right. So
Sure.
we'll say good night.
Good night,
Good night,
everybody.
everybody. Take care. Have a great week.